The glossy brochure had promised her perfection. She had flipped through it in the morning, champagne flute in hand, her manicured finger pausing on the photo of a man in a pressed tuxedo, silver tray gleaming with crystal glasses, posture impeccable, eyes lowered with respectful grace. 5-star butler service, it had read. Clarissa Fontaine had smiled then, satisfied. It was precisely what she needed to match her reputation, a lifestyle that was as polished as her social media feed, as immaculate as the polished marble floors of her penthouse. Every detail of her life was curated, controlled, flawless. So when the doorbell chimed, she smoothed the fabric of her silk robe and positioned herself before the mirror near the entrance, admiring the way the soft light caught her cheekbones. She opened the door expecting the smooth voice of refinement, a bow, and perhaps even the faint scent of cologne meant to whisper class. What greeted her instead made her grip the doorknob tighter. The man standing there was nothing like the photograph. He was tall, yes, but dressed in a shirt rolled up at the sleeves, faint creases speaking of a long day rather than professional starch. His trousers weren't tailored but looked worn, lived in, as though he had chosen practicality over elegance. From his pocket, a dented harmonica peeked out, the metal glinting in the hallway light. A leather satchel hung over his shoulder, scuffed and scratched with the marks of years, not weeks. But it was his companion that made Clarissa's mouth part in disbelief. A small boy with unruly curls, cheeks flushed, and feet completely bare, clutching the man's hand as if it were a lifeline. "Ah," the man began, shifting his weight uncomfortably, his voice warm but unsure. "I'm your butler." Clarissa blinked, the words sinking in like stones into water. "My, what?" Her tone carried the sharpness of crystal about to crack. "Your butler," he repeated, as though saying it again would somehow make it true. He gave her a sheepish smile, running his free hand through his hair. The little boy peeked out from behind his leg, wide-eyed and grinning, a front tooth missing, his innocence shining in contrast to the gleaming sophistication of the penthouse hallway. Clarissa's eyes narrowed. "This is a 5-star establishment. I ordered a butler. What I see is," she trailed off, gesturing at the barefoot child, at the harmonica, at the sheer absurdity of the situation. The man straightened a little, dignity flickering in his tired eyes. "Name's Daniel. This is my son, Max. Things got a bit complicated. The agency didn't tell me this was going to be 5-star. He gave a short laugh, the kind of laugh that masked nerves more than humor. The boy tugged at his father's hand, whispering too loudly, "Daddy, is this the castle?" The word hit Clarissa like a jolt. Castle. He thought her penthouse was a castle. She glanced at the boy, at his white eyes soaking in the gleam of marble floors and the crystal chandelier glittering behind her. Clarissa's irritation wavered for the briefest second, replaced by a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, unease at her own life of polished surfaces. Still, her voice was clipped when she replied, "This is not what I asked for." "Where is the man from the brochure? The one with the tray and the tuxedo?" Daniel shifted his satchel strap again, glancing at his son as though weighing whether to step away from the threshold. "They didn't have anyone else available. It was last minute. I'm filling in." His eyes softened, his voice dropping. "I can do this. I might not have the tux, but I can make sure you're looked after." Clarissa laughed sharply, the sound echoing off the hallway walls. "Looked after? With a barefoot child, wandering my floors and a harmonica in your pocket? This isn't a carnival, mister." "Just Daniel," he said quickly. She almost shut the door right then. It would have been simple: send him away, call the agency, demand compensation. That was what Clarissa Fontaine did. She never tolerated less than what she ordered, what she expected, what she deserved. Yet, her hand didn't move. Instead, she found her gaze drifting again to the boy. "Max," Daniel had called him. Max was staring at her with unabashed curiosity, his small hand still holding tightly to his father's. He wasn't embarrassed about being barefoot on polished marble, nor about intruding on a world that wasn't his. He just looked, happy to be there. Clarissa's heart gave an unfamiliar tug, one she instantly tried to bury beneath years of practiced indifference. Daniel cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Look, if you want, I'll leave. I get it, this isn't what you paid for. But, if you give me a chance, I promise I'll try. Max'll stay out of the way. Won't you, buddy?" Max nodded furiously, his curls bouncing. "I can be invisible," he announced proudly. Clarissa almost smirked to spite herself. The sheer absurdity of the declaration clashed with the seriousness of his face. Invisible. As though a child could ever be invisible in a place like this. Her fingers tapped the doorframe. She should send them away. She should demand the perfect, polished butler she had been promised. Yet something in Daniel's tired but resolute eyes made her hesitate. Something about the boy's unfiltered innocence chipped at the cold perfection she wrapped around herself like armor. For the first time in years, Clarissa Fontaine felt the script of her carefully arranged life falter. A harmonica, a scuffed satchel, and a barefoot child had stepped into her world of crystal and silk, and somehow, shutting the door on them didn't seem as simple as it should have been. Dinner had always been a performance for Clarissa Fontaine. The setting mattered more than the meal itself, crystal glasses placed just so, silverware aligned with surgical precision, candles lit at the perfect height to flatter her complexion. A string quartet or a carefully chosen playlist usually provided the background, nothing too intrusive, nothing too warm. She liked silence dressed up as sophistication. It reminded her of control. That night, she had planned nothing different. The wine was decanted, the lamb delivered by the hotel's chef, the table gleaming under the soft glow of her chandelier. She sat in her satin chair, spine straight, waiting for the quiet efficiency of her newly arrived butler. Yet what filled the penthouse was not the hush of formal service, but the reedy, soulful notes of a harmonica. Daniel had settled on the marble floor near the edge of the dining room, legs crossed like a man far too comfortable in a place he didn't belong. The harmonica in his hands looked like it had traveled through storms, the metal dulled and dented, but the sound that poured from it was warm and startlingly alive. His son, Max, ran barefoot across the expanse of the rug, chasing his own shadow as though the chandelier's golden light had created a personal game just for him. Clarissa tried to pretend she wasn't watching, but her eyes betrayed her. Each note bent and sighed, filling corners of her penthouse that had never heard anything so raw. It was not polished music, it wasn't controlled or curated. Yet it carried something she couldn't name, loneliness, yes, but also a tender kind of hope. She lifted her wine glass, pressing the rim against her lips, but the taste of the vintage suddenly felt flat, dulled by the strange warmth curling around her chest. Her brows furrowed, irritation rising to mask the unfamiliar pull. "This is dinner," she said sharply, her voice cutting into the music. "It is not, whatever this is." Daniel stopped mid-note, lowering the harmonica. He gave her a faint, almost apologetic smile. "Sorry. Music helps Max settle down. I thought it might make the room feel less stiff." Stiff. Her laugh was short, brittle. "This is a 5-star penthouse. Not a roadside bar." The boy, oblivious to the sharpness in her tone, darted across the rug and landed beside her chair, small hands reaching to tug lightly at the hem of her silk dress. His eyes were round, curious. "Do you ever laugh?" he asked, tilting his head in a way that reminded her of a stray puppy that once followed her car when she was a child. The question caught her off guard. "Excuse me," she said, her voice lowering, uncertain. "Daddy laughs all the time," Max continued, grinning, a gap where a tooth should be giving him a lopsided charm. "Even when things are hard. You don't laugh. Why not?" Clarissa opened her mouth to scold him, to remind him that it was wildly inappropriate to speak to her like that, but the words faltered when she met Daniel's eyes. He was watching her, not with arrogance, not with defiance, but with something softer, steadier. His gaze held the weight of a man who had weathered storms and still found ways to smile for the sake of someone else. Her breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. She turned back to her plate, slicing into the lamb with more force than necessary. "Children should not ask questions like that," she muttered. Max leaned closer, his little elbows on the edge of the table, utterly unbothered by her coolness. "I bet you'd sound nice if you did," he whispered, as though laughter were a sound she had simply forgotten how to make. Daniel cleared his throat softly, reaching for his son's shoulder. "Max, give her space." His voice carried no reprimand, only a gentle tug toward respect. Max huffed but obeyed, padding barefoot back to the rug, where he resumed his shadow-chasing game. Clarissa forced herself to focus on her food, on the perfect sear, the delicate sauce. But the flavors didn't spark against her tongue the way they usually did. The harmonica still lingered in her ears, haunting her despite the silence Daniel had retreated into. She glanced at him again, noticing details she had ignored at the door, The roughness of his hands, the way his shirt clung at the shoulders, the exhaustion etched into the corners of his face. Yet beneath the fatigue was an ease she envied, a man unafraid of imperfection. The silence stretched, filled only by the soft padding of Max's feet across the floor. Clarissa's penthouse, usually echoing with emptiness disguised as peace, now thrummed with small, living noises, the breath of a child, the faint scrape of a harmonica being toyed with, the creak of leather from Daniel's satchel as he shifted his weight. It was chaos. It was unrefined. And yet, it was not unbearable. Her fork hovered over the plate as realization struck her with an almost physical force. For the first time in years, she was not dining in isolation, surrounded by curated perfection. She was not a mannequin in a glass box. There was warmth here, alien but insistent. Max stumbled mid-run and tumbled onto the rug, laughing breathlessly at his own clumsiness. Daniel chuckled under his breath, setting the harmonica aside to help the boy up. The sound of their shared laughter rolled across the marble-like sunlight, bright and effortless. Clarissa's chest tightened. She pressed her lips together, willing herself to remain immune, but the edges of her control frayed. She set her fork down, staring at the boy and his father. A barefoot child and a man with a harmonica had invaded her immaculate world, and it felt more alive than the perfection she had ordered. Clarissa leaned back in her chair, the candlelight flickering against her face. For the first time in longer than she could admit, she felt the walls of her penthouse shift, not physically, but in spirit. Something was cracking, something she had built too carefully to keep herself untouchable. Her penthouse dinner was ruined, yes. But perhaps, in the ruins, something else had begun.